I might be a whiskey nerd, but even I can recognize a good rum, and this is a very good rum. Let me tell you about it in this week's review. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at a very nice rum, which despite me being a whiskey nerd is actually a very nice little addition to my bar. Now, this is coming from Killowen. They are a small batch distillery here in Ireland. I have talked about them a few times on the channel. They are very much a micro distillery, and they're making some really nice kind of craft products with a very nice line of whiskies which have been finished in rum casks. And it is those rum casks which are used to age this rum that are used to age their whiskies, like their rum and raisin whiskey, which is finished in rum casks and PX sherry casks. So it's great to see the distillery kind of having a holistic taste profile where you can taste the rum, you can taste the whiskey, you can kind of get the influence that it's had on each other. Unlike whiskey, rum is typically just made from sugar or very, very sugary things. So this rum has been made from a mix of 50% sugar and 50% blackstrap molasses. And rather than being distilled 3 times, it was actually distilled 2.5 times, which sounds a bit weird, it sounds impossible. What they did is basically they take the distillate from the first still, they cut it in 2, half that gets distilled twice, and half of it gets distilled once more, so you end up with half of it's been distilled 3 times, half of it's been distilled twice, hence 2.5 times. So that gives you much more of the funkiness that kind of comes through into the final product, because when you distill something, you kind of are subtracting some things. You're definitely concentrating other flavors, but you're also subtracting some of those kind of funkier, rounder, earthy notes. So by distilling it 2.5 times, you're going to get some of the spirit is going to be quite clean and quite kind of lighter, but then you're going to get that double distilled rum into the final product. It's going to give you much more of a kind of a funky kind of nose and funky palate. They do call this a dark rum, and I mean, from looking at it, you wouldn't think it's actually very dark. I mean, compared to a white rum, obviously, yeah, it's dark, but it's not like a black rum where they add those kind of black colorings in some rums to give it a very dark profile, but it's definitely darker than some other rums I've seen from Ireland, and I think it might be as dark as you can get a rum in Ireland on the market that's been made in Ireland. Now, what's interesting about this rum is that they actually don't just age it in 1 barrel or finish it in 2 barrels. They use a solera system, which is where you take different barrels. Let's say you take 4 different barrels, you kind of put them on top of each other with the first barrel, second barrel, third barrel, fourth barrel. And as you empty the 4th barrel, the spirit from the 3rd goes into the 4th, second into 3rd, first into 2nd, and you put new spirit in at the top. So that way it goes through all these 4 different barrels to get different flavors from each of those barrels and kind of give you a nice kind of continuous profile. Brendan Carty, the head distiller for Killowen, does believe in transparency. So on the back, he does have a little guide for that solera process. So the first cask, those top casks, are heavily charred Cabernet Sauvignon wine casks. The second one is ex-bourbon casks. Then you got the third is PX sherry casks. And the 4th cask, which only sits in for a very small amount of time, is an ex-peated Irish whiskey to give it just a bit more roundness and a bit more kind of little bit of depth, maybe adding to that earthy funk. Now I'm going to pour this into my glass, but I'm going to give one final note about the rum, because this is actually something of a charity project as well, because £1 from every purchase of this rum is donated to the Windrush Justice Fund. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of the Windrush scandal. It's a very bad chapter in like the UK's history, where families of immigrants were pretty poorly treated in 2018 thanks to some legal oversights and some very bad decisions made by some people who should have known better. But suffice it to say, these are children of immigrants, and so the distillery is kind of recognizing, because a lot of these immigrants came from the Caribbean and came from Afro-Caribbean countries, so it's important to kind of recognize that kind of darker legacy of kind of the slave trade and on imperialism had in kind of growing the rum trade. So in making this rum, they're saying that they're going to give a little bit back to that Windrush Justice Fund to kind of help, because that fund it gives micro grants to people, it gives assistance and legal assistance, and kind of really helps people deal with the troubles that they've encountered since the Windrush scandal in 2018. So it's something, if you want to find out more about it, I'll put a link down below to that foundation. But it's just a good thing to see what they're doing here in making rum there. Like Brendan Carty, I'm fairly certain he didn't have anything to do with the Windrush scandal, but it's good to recognise that legacy of the kind of problems in the rum trade. So now let's get to the rum and let's see how it is on the nose. Cheers. Okay, immediately on the nose, you get a nice kind of rummy funk coming out of the glass, but it is matched by a very rich kind of vanilla sweetness. Kind of like if you took like, I don't know, some kind of funky cake and you put a really nice rich vanilla icing on top of it, where you get kind of the flavours of both mixed together. Kind of like if you imagine like a carrot cake where you take in a bite, you get the spices, you get that kind of funky earthy note, but you also get that vanilla icing up top. So it's kind of like that kind of vibe where they're both coming out of the glass right there. It is coming in at 55% ABV, but I'm not really getting any kind of hit of alcohol on the nose. Like I also said, it was aged partially in peated, ex-peated Irish whiskey casks, but I'm not really getting any peat on the nose as well. Maybe those flavours will kind of come through into the palate, but what I am getting is kind of almost like a little bit of coconut, like a coconut cream pie, that kind of nice, sweet, like it is a very sweet nose on the whiskey. There's that little bit of earthiness, a little bit of fruitiness, and a bit of coconut, a kind of sweet coconut. There's also some kind of like some stewed red berries, where you get those kind of, you know, like red berries, like cranberries, that kind of like nice sweet red berries, and you stew them down a bit, kind of break down the sugars, and you get that kind of nice stewed red berry vibe. There's a bit of there's a lot of brown sugar as well coming through, kind of like treacle, like molasses. That will be blackstrap molasses were used in here, so it's not surprising that some of that flavour does carry through, especially because some of the rum was only distilled 2 times. But very sweet, very kind of caramelly. So let's go in for the palate and see how it is. Okay, there is the ABV. Definitely getting a bit of ABV tingle. Not a huge punch of ABV, but definitely that heat, that spiciness, that tingle comes through as soon as it hits your tongue. But that's also like on the nose, where you get that funk mixed with the sweetness. On the palate, it's definitely matched up with a lot of sweetness, more of that brown sugar, more of that vanilla comes through. Definitely some like more of those stewed berries, but they've kind of gone a little darker, a little deeper. I'll go in for a second sip and kind of see how they are. But I was also getting on the palate a little bit of oak. Yeah, like a little bit of kind of oak. I mean, it did go through 4 different casks, so not surprising that there's a little bit of oak that went through there. And maybe on the finish, I'm already getting a little whiff of peat, but let's go in for a second sip first and see if I can find more of those fruity notes. Cheers. Okay, yeah, definitely stewed, darker, like red fruits, not like the red berries I was getting on the palate, on the nose, sorry. On the palate, it's more like dark fruits, dark things. That's probably that PX sherry influence. On the nose, it might have been the wine cask influence kind of coming through, giving me those brighter red berries. On the palate, more syrupy, more like those dark, like stewed raisins, stewed plums, deeper, darker, kind of still sweet fruits like that on the palate. Like I said, a bit of oak, still very sweet, still caramelly, still treacly, yeah, very nice. But I think there's also a nice bit of notes on the finish, so I'm gonna go in again, but focus on the finish. Cheers. Okay, so on the finish, like you get that fruitiness up front, you get that sweetness, you get those stewed berries. It does fade back a little, like it's lingering, like that sweetness, that kind of syrupy sweetness, that's lingering a little bit more than like that funky note, that kind of earthy note that you do get with some rums. It's kind of lingering less than those sweet notes. Those are there, and then that probably lets that oak spice come up a little bit. And as I'm breathing, as I'm talking, I'm getting like a little whiff of peat smoke, not a huge amount. I wouldn't, if you didn't know it was there, you didn't know to look for it, you might not even know it's there. But I do know it's there, and I do know it kind of helps sometimes to round out some of those notes. Like that sweetness probably is amped up a little bit by the tiny inclusion of peat smoke in there. Just kind of helps to round it out a bit. A little bit of tingle still, a little bit of that oak spice lingering, but kind of nice. It's not on the finish as funky as you might think from the nose. Like the nose quite heavy up front, quite kind of earthy. On the finish it leans more back into that sweetness and into that kind of cask influence. I'm also getting, like, as I'm breathing, as I'm talking, a little bit of a resurgence of the coconut from the nose. Like if you imagine like kind of toasted coconut where you get like a blowtorch and you toast it and it's dried out, still kind of sweet but definitely dried out coconut. That kind of vibe is coming through as I'm breathing. So there's a little bit to unpack in here. I mean, I'm not surprised with the amount of casks they've used in this whiskey. It's unsurprising that there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of different layers in the rum. I keep saying whiskey because I'm used to reviewing that, but this is a very nice rum. And I've tried it out, as you can tell, in a couple of different cocktails. And this week, this Friday, if you want to check it out, I'll be making a corn and oil cocktail because I tried out a few different recipes and I thought the corn and oil worked the best because I put out whiskey reviews. Normally, this is only a rum review this week. I put out whiskey reviews on Wednesdays. I put out cocktail recipes on Friday. So if you want to see that cocktail recipe, make sure you scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button, and while you're there, leave me a comment to say what kind of stuff you'd like to see me review in future. But until then, I'm going to keep on enjoying this, and I will see you next time. Sláinte.